end of tonight, we must trend that. It's a must. We're not going to allow those people rest until I imagine David. I want to understand David because David has been on this issue for the past, I think, 7-8 months. Steady, bringing us update upon update upon update. So please, guys on the platform, the best you can do, the least you can do for us is to trend that hashtag one more time. And with that, let me welcome David. David, good evening. You're welcome to the Vawulence space.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
How are you doing, my brother? You're welcome. I don't know if I think this is your first time speaking here. I don't know if this is your first time on the platform because
Yes,
when you're
yes,
going to
first
spaces.
time.
Oh, this is your first time on the platform. Welcome, bro. And as the name implies, now we the press neck. Now we are those 4 people tweeting it. Did you hear of the story of First Kiamu where they said Peter B lodged some people in hotel? Did you hear that story, please, David?
Yeah, I heard it.
We are the ones. We are the ones tweeting from the hotel room. As you have joined us in the hotel room, so please, they just tell us what your favorite
room service. We just need room service. What room service do you want?
And tell us your room number, your favorite room number. We're going to send. We'll make sure we keep it for you and tell us what you want, how you like it. On this platform, this thing will come and attend to you. So please, you're welcome to the platform, my brother. I don't want this to be like an interview. I just want us to have a discussion because on this platform we don't do interviews, we do discussions. You know, when you join us here, you want to know. I want to understand. I would like you on this platform. I know you've shared this story a whole lot. You've told people about you've talked about this Tinubu's drug case. I think probably you might be thinking like you sound like a broken record. I think so because I have always been talking about it, but I know you understand how important it is. Why such a dangerous man should not be the next president. If it is one thing I know that about you, that you understand that. So I would like you, looking at our topic, if you want to talk on the Imo LP primaries, fine. I would love you to talk about that also because I know your family also to the LP. So, but if you don't want to talk about that and you want to go straight to what I know you're an expert. You are an expert. You are the one that brought this man, opened the man Nash. Yeah, the reason why you brought the whole lot of we are even discussing about this man today, about this part, because many people knew about this, but it was not, nobody did the amount of job you did on this man. Nobody went as far as how far you went in exposing the man. So I would want you on this platform today. Please. Even my friend, even Jimmy just sent me a message right now. Jimmy had to go to the court himself and pay to get the hard copy. He just said it right now. He said, you were the one that made him go to that. So please, on this platform, I want to understand why. Let us understand why you had to do all you did to expose this man. Please, David, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So I was trying to start my career in the UK. It didn't really happen for me. And, eventually when I managed to get into what I thought was a decent graduate position at KPMG, it didn't really work out in the end. So basically in 2013, I packed up and I came back to Nigeria to start from scratch. So if you remember at the time, that was at the height of that thing that they called Africa Rising. Everybody was coming back to Nigeria. So people who went abroad to study like I did, it was normal. And when you had finished, maybe you had done your master's or whatever, you came back to Nigeria. That was the normal expectation. It was actually a minority of people who used to stay behind in the UK or wherever. Everyone used to come back. So I came back in 2013. I did my youth service. Then in 2014 was when I started working substantively in Lagos. So I started my career, actually started off in journalism. I actually started at Vanguard newspaper, which most people don't know. But I didn't stay there very long. My then editor actually thought he was doing me a favor. So because he said, look, we know that you're going to leave within 6 months. We know that what we're paying you here isn't going to keep you here because they were paying like 35,000 naira a month or something. So he picked up the phone and he called his friend who ran a PR agency called Black House Media. So that's how I got into marketing. So at the time when I started my career in marketing in 2014 at BHM, that was at the height of what they called the presidential campaign then, the APC campaign then. So the agency I worked at, BHM, wasn't directly involved in the campaign, didn't do any political work, but there were several agencies around. If you're familiar with how the marketing communications industry works around the Ikeja area, so between Opebi and Ikeja GRA, that's basically where Nigeria's marketing communications industry leaves. So all the major agencies you can think of, Insights, Noah's Ark, TBWA, Verdanzil, that's where all of them are. So by virtue of that geographical closeness, we had the opportunity to sort of see very up close what that thing they called a campaign in 2014 was. And I remember at the time, because I at the time I didn't really think of myself as a Goodluck Jonathan supporter or anybody's supporter. I was a typical IJGB Nigerian at the time. I was kind of detached. I was very sort of, I kind of took a lot of things for granted because I grew up during the Obasanjo era. So there were a lot of things I just took for granted that that's how Nigeria is always going to be. The economy is always going to be growing at roughly 5% a year. I genuinely, because the military era was very, very sort of old memory. So the thoughts that things could worsen never genuinely crossed my mind. But then when I started taking a look at what this thing they called the presidential campaign was in 2014, I realized that this is not what I think of as a political campaign in any meaningful sense of the word. These people are trying to set a country on fire. That is what this is. That this entity known as the APC, this is not a constructive political campaign that I'm witnessing here. This is war. So that was when I saw for the first time tactics like actively and knowingly trying to inflame ethnic tensions for the sole purpose of trying to get some group of people, not just to vote against another group of people, but to actually, if possible, to inflict violence. I had never seen that before. That was the first time I saw it. Between that 2014 and 2015 period, that was the first time I realized that a lot, if not most of the, all those tribal conversations you find in places like Naira Land and even on Twitter and on Facebook, that 80-something% of those conversations are completely contrived. Those accounts are they're bot accounts, and there are people who are paid to sit down all day and hurl this like really hurtful, offensive invective at other groups of people. So you literally have groups of teams of people who sit down and stage entire conversations. So you have a Nairaland thread that stretches on for 20 pages, and 90% of it is completely contrived. It's not actual organic conversation. I had never seen these kinds of things before. That was the first time I was witnessing those things with my two eyes. Like the sheer extent to which these people would go. And it became very clear to me that the people who were, the political formation within the APC that was at the forefront of funding these despicable tactics that these agencies were using, and that was at the forefront of doing any kind of unethical marketing tactic you can think of, was the ACN faction, the Tinubu faction, right? It was the Lagos people. The CPC people and the AMPP people were actually quite chill in comparison. Those ones were not really that bothered. The NPDP people, the Amechi types, those ones were, those ones, they were a bit mischievous too. But it was the ACN people, those were the real terrible people in the whole thing. That was the first time I took note of the people, because prior to that time, I had never really, I'd heard a lot of bad things about Tinubu, but you almost think of him as almost like some kind of like a necessary evil, right? So you don't really pay that much attention to what he's doing. And also at the time, that was when I realized for the first time that a lot of the sort of positive spin or the positive coverage that administrations in Lagos got, so the Fashola administration in particular, and then going into the Ambode administration, which only lasted for a term, and even Tinubu's administration, so that a lot of the positive media coverage they got was paid for. It wasn't organic. So that was when I understood for the first time that the idea I had in my head, for example, that Fashola was a good governor, it was an idea that somebody implanted in my head. There was actually no real evidence to support it. Not really. But basically, that there was a whole marketing and media buying effort to push certain narratives. Again, if you didn't work within the communications and marketing industry at the time, you would have no way of knowing any of this. The only reason all of this came to become apparent to me was because I worked in the industry and I saw it up close. If you had told me these things that I said, it's just gist. So somebody's just talking. But I saw these things in my two eyes. So that was the first time I think that I took an interest in political campaigning in Nigeria. Because when the APC won the election in 2015, I remember thinking to myself, oh no, something terrible has just happened in this country. I didn't obviously know how bad it was going to get. I don't think any of us did. But I could feel it that something terrible had just happened. I obviously knew that Buhari was never going to be a good president. I think anyone who had spent 10 minutes reading up on the person Buhari was would have known that without any shred of a doubt. But just the type of nonsense that went into the campaign made me very it made me determine that the next time there is a campaign like this happening, like the next time, because I knew that 2019 wasn't going to be a proper election because Buhari was going to be incumbent. He was going to rig it, obviously, which he did. But I promised myself that the next time there's this kind of election happening in Nigeria, like a crossroads election, where it's possible for the ruling party to actually lose power because there is no longer an incumbent candidate. As much as possible, I would like for it to be the case that the disinformation and the misinformation that went into making people make a stupid decision that they made in 2015, I would like to have the power to counter that disinformation and misinformation, right? Because I used to complain to my colleagues all the time that what are Nigerian journalists doing? Right? I was trained as a journalist, but I wasn't working as a journalist. I was working in PR. But because we collaborated with journalists very closely at the time, I guess all of this is partly why I came into the journalism space eventually. And I came in from a fiercely independent angle. I refused to affiliate with any major newsroom because when you work with them as from a PR perspective, then you see just how old the whole space is. You would write something for a journalist. You're a PR executive. You write an article, right? And you expect that when you send it to the journalist, even though you're paying for it, you expect the journalist to still change it. You understand? To make it appear like it's newsy, right? The journalist will not change one apostrophe, one full stop. He will publish everything you sent him to just like that. Wow. On the newspaper, right? Sometimes even if it's a press release, sometimes even the blurb at the end, where there's like two dashes and then you write the ends and then there's like an information. Sometimes they'll publish that too, even though it's not supposed to be published, because that's just how lazy Nigerian journalists were, unfortunately. So I told myself during that 2015 cycle that the next time there was going to be this kind of election in Nigeria, which would be 2023, I would like to be in a position where when these people come with their tactics, that they would actually be able to push back on them, because I felt as if the Nigerian people were very unprepared for the amount of brainwashing, the amount of disinformation that was pushed on them in 2015. Like that's I still think of 2015 as like the original sin of election campaigns in Nigeria. That the nonsense that was done in 2015 to an extent even overshadows some of what was done even in 2023, because that's how bad 2015 actually was. So when 2023 started coming around last year, and then it started to become clear who the main contenders were going to be. I think as far back as 2021, we had already started to get an idea, because I had already started seeing who the media platforms that are loyal to the Tinubu people had started attacking. I started noticing that for whatever reason, it was Peter Obi that they were attacking. So I remember in September, was it, or was it October? No, it was October 2021, when the whole Pandora Papers thing came to the fore. And Nicholas Ibekwe at Premium Times did what he thought was some kind of groundbreaking expose, because it had Peter Obi's name inside it. And I remember him literally coming and you could literally see him bouncing up and down with glee. He was so excited, because in his mind, he thought he was doing something, something that was going to destroy somebody, right? So from that point, it was already easy to tell that, okay, for whatever reason, Peter Obi is thought of as the person who is the challenger to the what's the word I'm looking for? To the establishment here. For whatever reason, the establishment is afraid of him, which is why they're attacking him and they're sending people after him. it was also obvious that Atiku was definitely going to run, because he always runs. He'll probably run in 2027 and 2031 as well if he's still alive. And then it also increasingly became clear that Tinubu intended to run. Of those three candidates, it was very obvious to me that one of them in particular had by far the most baggage, right? That, okay, this guy has a huge asterisk next to his name. I've heard so many things about this person, but maybe again, because like in 2015, when people were railroaded into supporting Buhari because of lack of information and the amount of disinformation that was pushed on them, I said, okay, this time around, before the usual suspects start inventing things out of nowhere, start presenting Tinubu as some hero and messiah that he was not, the same way they did to Buhari, something definitive needs to be done. His story needs to be told in a very honest and forthright way, so people know exactly who this person is. Because I felt like that wasn't done in 2015. I felt like if something similar was done in 2015, where a media platform with huge reach was able to get through to people and show people the reality of who and what Muhammadu Buhari is and what he represented, I feel as if, at least in the South, a lot of the support he got, he wouldn't have gotten it, right? So that was why I set out last year that this man's story must be told, and it must be told in full. It was actually, it was actually almost by accident that the drug trafficking thing kind of almost ended up becoming the center of the story, because there were so many other things initially that I wanted to focus on. If you read that story, you know that there is a lot of stuff that hasn't even been left out. There were so many things I wanted to focus on, but maybe it's like in the final 5 or 6 paragraphs that you see where I just like chopped in a few of them. I referenced them in passing. Each of those things I mentioned could have been a story in itself. So the whole alpha beta thing, for example, I would have liked to make a lot more of that, but I guess what I came to what I understand about the Nigerian audience, and that comes from my time in marketing, and which is why I think that starting out in marketing was a very good thing for me, as against starting out in journalism. From my time in marketing, I've come to understand the types of topics that the Nigerian audience engages with better, and the type of the ways that you would engage with the Nigerian audience that will get an intellectual response from them. So I knew that going into the nitty-gritty, the financial details of alpha beta, it would just fly over most people's heads. Most people wouldn't even understand why that is a scandal, right? And to be honest with you, if you tell Nigerians that this person is a thief, this person stole 200 billion or something, in Nigeria, that's not a scandal. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is, right? So there are some topics like that. If you were to focus on them, you would just lose the audience. So I thought, okay, of all the many issues that I've laid out, because I literally had like a spreadsheet on my laptop, right? I had like 7 or 8 different things I wanted to touch on. Which of these things do I think will illustrate to the Nigerian audience the best that this person has no business running for president? And I went through all of them, the alpha beta thing, then the potential, his involvement with his supposed half brother Wale Tinubu and Oando, and the whole Pandora Papers angle to that, because there was a whole angle which is why I also found it funny why they kept on trying to smear Peter Obi's name in the Pandora Papers, because his name was also mentioned in the Pandora Papers. But putting that aside, then the whole thing about his stolen identity, because basically the person he claimed to be is not who he is at all. The date of birth that nobody knows, the ancestry which remains hidden, all those things. So, and then the drug trafficking. And I thought, okay, well, I think people have heard about some of these to have access to those documents. I wasn't the first person to have actually even covered the story, but again, I was just the first person to take it in, like to a depth person to take it in, like to a depth that no one had taken it to before, because I was determined that people must understand, right? And by the time I'm done telling this story, nobody should be able to come and say that it's not true. right? Because I should be able to put it out in a way that makes any comeback impossible. That's what I aim to do with all of my stories. It's like, so it must be impossible for you to come and say that I lied or I made it up. So that was how I decided to make that the focus of the story. There were so many other things and there were some other things I also incorporated into the story, such as the real estate holdings that he and his family hold. I even found that a bit surprising, and it illustrates something. I think it was Sirdam that said it the other day when I was listening, that some of these guys, we actually ascribe a level of intellect to them that they don't even have, right? Because um, politically exposed people and drug pushers around the world, when they're buying property, a lot of the time you will never know, because the property will register to a business that is owned by another business, that is owned by a shell company in the British Virgin Islands, that is owned by a corporation in the Cayman Islands, that is owned. So by the time and there can be like a link of like 20 companies in a row, you can't find who owns it. But in this case, this guy was so dumb that he used his full government name, he and his children. So you can literally go on US public registries and you will see properties registered to Habiba to Inda Bola Tinubu, Zainab Abisola Tinubu, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Remy, and it's just there, which gives you an idea of just the sheer amount of audacity that this dude has. Because as far as he's concerned, who's going to stop me? What are you going to do anyway? Even if you see it, and so fucking what? That's genuinely how he sees these things. And I guess he has got away with it for all these years. So I guess you would understand why he sees it that way. So I think it was July last year this thing was published. So I started working on this story in May. Actually, it was when I started gathering all these materials I was able to gather, the Truth Finder reports, the real estate records from St. George's County, the court records, because that was quite a substantial document, and everything else that I could get my hands on. And then obviously I'm not going to rehash the story because I'm sure you've read it, you've watched the documentary too. And the actual draft, that took the best part of a week to draft, then went to the editor, then went back and forth a few times to make sure that it was completely airtight. And then I put it out. And then after a few months, I realized that even though, because the back-end data showed that like close to 1 million people had read it on the website, but I still felt as if this thing isn't having as much of an impact as I would like for it to have. And my conclusion was that the reason it's not having the impact I would like it to have is because a lot of the audience simply hasn't accessed it. What drove me to that conclusion was when I saw, I think it was Gist Lover's blog, decided to carry a variant of the story in the Gist Lovers blog kind of language and format. And I saw the amount of engagement it was getting. And I realized that there's a very large part of the Nigerian audience that simply cannot read long form journalism. So they simply cannot sit down and read 6,000 words. They just can't do it. So I thought there has to be another way of reaching these people. And at that time, I just started up the West Africa Weekly YouTube channel. So that was where the idea to do this, to produce this story as a documentary came from. So if you watch the documentary, you'd realize that the voiceover is literally just me reading the story. That's literally what it is. So I literally recorded myself reading the story. And I had a small team of like freelance video editors working with me. And over the course of I think it was it October? Was it November? No, it was November. So over the course of 2 weeks was when they worked to produce this thing. And then I put it out. And then after I put it out and it started getting to the audiences I hadn't got to previously, then it started having more of an outsized impact. Then Rise TV brought me on. Then TV stations and radio stations started discussing it because I think at that point, the dam had burst. So the mainstream media, which had tried to block it out for all those months, at that point realized that they couldn't do anything about it anymore because YouTube is more powerful than all of them. So then it started going to places it hadn't gone to before. It started getting into international media as well. You may not know this. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway because what the hell? Right now, I don't really send anybody, Papa. I was actually supposed to speak at Chatham House earlier this month, on this issue, but you know how it is in the UK. The pressure merchants got to work, and that invitation to Chatham House may or may not happen. So, but it is what it is. But that's just to illustrate how far this thing went and how aware the outside world is. Because I promise you, it's not just in Nigeria that people are aware of this thing. People are globally aware. And part of the reason why such a person can absolutely not be allowed to swear an oath and become the president and commander in chief of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria is that the minute it happens, that's when you would realize that a lot of these so-called international media platforms and foreign diplomats or whatever, foreign governments are just waiting for an excuse to kick Nigeria. Like Nigeria is already down, but they're just waiting for an excuse for Nigeria to fall down completely so that they can kick Nigeria even more. Because that's where you then start seeing the sorts of headlines you never thought you would see in your lifetime. And it's not just the headlines. The actual diplomatic and economic fallout of that's when you start to see things that you never thought you would see. If you think the Nigerian passport is disrespected as it is now, that's when you see what actual disrespect is. That's when you start seeing other African countries start making requirements for Nigerians to apply for visas using similar requirements to what places like the UK and the EU, make Nigerians go through. You start seeing those kinds of things. I promise you, people are waiting for the opportunity to do these things to Nigerians. Like, I'm not even completely sure why the world outside wants to kick Nigerians so hard, because it's not Tinubu that's going to suffer it. I mean, he's going to hold a diplomatic passport. It's us. It's the ordinary people who are going to suffer it. So I'm not sure why the world outside seems to be so eager. They're literally just waiting for the chance to do these things. I know that in the case of the US, however, I'll just quickly close with this because I'm not trying, as you said, it's a discussion. I'm not trying to monopolize the space. In the case of the US, I heard from a reliable source, which obviously I cannot name here, that a large part of the reason why the US government, even though these things are on public record, at any point in time, the US government could have made it clear that the way it's made it clear with Pablo Noriega of Panama and Hernandez of Honduras recently, that this person is a drug kingpin or this person was involved with drug trafficking. A main part of the reason why the US government has not done that in this case was because apparently in the 90s, shortly after his indictment and the forfeiture and whatnot, part of the reason why they gave him a relatively soft landing with that forfeiture order, even though that can in itself can be classified as a conviction. There's a whole debate around that, but let's not even get into that. But part of the reason why he even got that relatively soft landing was apparently because it was used as some kind of informant, basically, as some kind of foreign intelligence asset. So basically, in return for not locking his ass up and for not putting him into a whole lot of trouble, he was handled as an informant, basically, and that's why. That's partly why he has this confidence now that he's being protected, and that would explain why. So, for example, in my case, there are several U.S. government institutions that I reached out to that refused to speak to me. So I remember, I'm actually even going to mention names. So there's a guy, if you've seen this letter that was flying around sometime last year, it was a letter from somebody who used to work at the U.S. What's it called? The U.S. consulate in Lagos. His name was I think Kevin Kellam or something like that. I think it was it either the commissioner of police or in Lagos or the no, it wasn't the commissioner of police. So I think it was Inspector General of Police. No, sorry, that's a different letter. I've forgotten who it was that sent him this letter, but he responded, and this letter was going around Twitter for a while last year, where he basically said, yes, there was an indictment, and yes, in the context of what happened, the forfeiture can be classed as a criminal conviction and whatnot. So in the process of putting the story together last year, I actually reached out to him. I found him on LinkedIn. I reached out to him. And his response, I actually included his response in the documentary in November. His response was basically, I can't say anything. because if I say anything, it's going to affect the diplomatic relationship between the US and Nigeria. So please reach out to the DEA instead. The DEA is the Drug Enforcement Administration. If you watch Narcos, you know what the DEA is. So I found that response odd, but that's fine. I reached out to the DEA. Now, according to their own rules on their own website, it states that all media inquiries are actioned within a maximum of 48 hours. So I reached out to them in June last year. We're in March now. We're getting to the end of March 2023. I followed up 3 different times, and they never go back to me. So I mean, draw your own conclusions from that. And I think at this point, I'll drop the mic here so that I don't start sort of droning on and on. But yeah, I hope that I shared some clarity on this.
My brother,
Bola was a snitch. That was what he was. Bola ratted out the top guy.
Yeah. He doesn't have the same file, but he was actually that snitch. Yeah. So, bro, thank you very much. I think I'll leave you. Please stay up here with us. It's going to be a very, very long, wonderful night with you on the platform. Thank you for sticking out your time to come and share your this information with us on the platform. We do not take it for granted. Thank you, Google. We always go on Google, do our research, and come out here. And you've said a whole lot of stuff that I've been echoing on this platform. I'm happy that at least we can get to hear from you yourself here. Thank you very much, my brother. Thank you. Please stay with us here. I know plenty of people want to ask you questions. I'll still want to even go deep into your mind to ask some pertinent questions myself. But right now, I want us to take this discussion to LP because I have one